Good afternoon, everyone. I hope you can all hear me. So let's start off today's lecture from where we stopped. So we were looking at debt capital market and debt capital market instruments. On Thursday, we covered the introduction to capital market, where we saw the role and significance of capital markets, who are the participants in a capital market, and why do they intervene. And then we saw the ways in which you could trade in a capital market. So you could do it in two ways. One is in the primary market, where you directly liaise and communicate with the issuer of that security, and the fund flow goes from the investor to the issuing company. And what are the functions of primary markets? We saw origination, underwriting, and distribution. Then we had secondary markets. There the main goal was wealth maximization. The fund flow and the communication happens between investors. So they trade the already issued securities. Okay, so there we saw an interesting concept called margin trading. And then we moved to the significance of secondary market. Why do we need a secondary market, especially with the view of supporting primary markets? Okay, and then we started off with debt capital market in detail. We know capital market, according to the nature of the claim, capital market can be divided into debt capital and equity. So throughout today, and I think probably next week as well, we will be looking at debt capital, and then thereafter we will move to the equity capital market. So in debt capital market, we saw there are two issuers coming in here. We have governments who come in for their long-term requirements, and then we have corporates who come into the debt capital market to raise funding for their long-term requirements as well. Again, debt capital market can be divided broadly into the primary market and secondary market as well. Then why do we need a debt capital market? We understood that, especially for the government, it is the main market that they intervene for to raise funds, because government cannot go to the equity market to raise funds. They could go for investment purpose, but not for source of financing. Getting their source of financing done is not a way for them in the equity market. Then we saw who are the participants who operate in a debt capital market. We had issuers and investors common in any market. Then we had managers who help in structuring. Then we had agents and trustees who are there to represent the investors and safeguard investor interest. And then finally the platform, the infrastructure system that was giving both issuer, investor, manager, and even the trustee a platform to do their trading activities and monitoring activities easily. Then saw the advantages and disadvantages of debt financing. Any source of financing has its ups and downs. You need to understand that clearly. So today we will start off from this point, where we will start to look at the different types of debt capital market instruments. So broadly, debt capital market instruments can be classified into two. You have bonds and you have debentures. Now, most of the text that is involved, when you look at several textbooks, sometimes they interchange these words. But on a fundamental and a theoretical basis, these two are different. Let's see what they are and the differences in detail. Now, bonds are generally secured debt instruments, which are issued by the government. Okay, and because they are issued by the government, mostly they carry no credit risk. So that's why you call them a secured debt instrument. Okay, and their repayment is usually in the form of fixed interest rate, that interest payment, and on the maturity of the bond, your principal amount will be given back to you. The investor's investment amount will be given back on maturity. What are debentures? Debentures are instruments which are usually issued by corporates, companies, who look to raise medium to long-term funds. Okay, and these debentures could be in the form of secured or unsecured debentures. Okay, now let's get into the clear differences between these two. So we know bonds are usually issued by government corporations, government agencies, or sometimes you have certain financial institutions issuing them as well. But even on a practical sense, especially in Sri Lanka, you mostly see bonds coming from the government agencies. Okay, debentures. Debenture issues are usually done by privately held or non-financial institutions. Okay, there are certain banks who are getting into as well, but usually it's a company or a corporate that does this debenture issue. Bonds, because they are usually given by governments, issued by the governments, they are of high secured in nature. They carry less or literally no credit risk. But debentures could be on either form. You could get secured debentures, or you could even invest in unsecured debentures. You have both the types available for you. Now, when you look at bonds, bonds are relatively long-term in nature, even longer than debentures. The usual debenture tenor is 5 years. It ranges between 2 to 5. That's why you say medium to long term. Okay. But you have bonds which go even way beyond than debentures. Now, that doesn't mean the maximum tenor of a debenture is 5 years. Practically and mostly we see corporates issuing for 5 years, because if you issue debentures longer than 5 years, unless the company is a very established, well-known company, rarely investors would prefer such a long tenor coming from a private company, because longer the tenor, uncertainties are involved. You don't know whether the issuer would survive for so long. Okay, so considering those factors, 5 years is a reasonable tenor for most of the investors to invest in for debentures. But there can be certain debentures which are more than 5 years as well. But remember, usually in that situation, if the debenture is more than 5 years, it comes from a very good issuer or a very strong issuer. Okay. Bonds are considered less risky. We know why, because it is secured in nature. And debentures, because it can be of a higher risk because of the unsecured nature, because the issuer is a privately held party, so there's some kind of a credit risk involved. So comparatively to the bond, debentures carry a higher risk. And again, because of this, you could see bonds having a low interest rate than debentures. Debentures usually carry a better interest than the bonds. Okay. Now, when I was mentioning about the bonds, I highlighted here that on maturity, principal amount is paid back. So you will be wondering why I have mentioned it in the bonds and not in the debentures. Yes, in debentures also, on maturity, your amount will be repaid. But there are certain types of debentures, especially convertible debentures, which gives you the option to convert it into an equity instrument. Okay, so that's another differentiating factor. Now we are going to look into the types of bonds. Okay, so this how we have structured this. We have first gone through the market instruments, bonds and debentures, what they are, what are the differences. Now we are going to see the types of bonds available and then the debentures involved, and then we will move to the latter part of valuations. So when it comes to the types of bonds, what is the most common type of bond that you see? The treasury bonds. The treasury bonds are sovereign bonds which are issued by the sovereign or the government of that country. These are considered default risk free, but always remember, for it to be default risk free, it has to be issued in that country's currency. Okay, if they've been issued in that country's currency, yes, they are considered as default risk free. Then you have sukuk bonds. Now these sukuk bonds are Sharia compliant instruments. These are involved in more into Islamic banking. Okay, now this is a very special kind of a bond, because you know, as per the Sharia law, earning interest is not encouraged or prohibited, because according to their value system, they don't want to earn money from just loaning funds. They want it to come out from a certain operation or from a certain activity. So they are willing to earn a profit, but not just mere interest from just keeping funds in a bank account. So sukuk bond is a hybrid like. It has both the bond features and certain features of equity as well. Now this we will elaborately talk about and see why these, on what ways these sukuk bonds differ from their other conventional bonds. Okay, so far, just for this time being, understand that sukuk bond is a Sharia compliant bond that is being issued. Okay, next we have corporate bonds. So I told you bonds can be issued by corporates, very rare locally, but internationally, yes, you might see. Again, when they issue bonds, they look for long-term financing. Okay, then we have convertible bonds. Convertible bonds, remember, these convertible bonds are not going to be issued by government. Government cannot give out equity. Okay, so if a corporate issues a particular bond, that bond could carry this convertibility nature. There, what happens on maturity, the holder or the investor has the right, has the ability to decide whether to get the investment back or to convert it into a equity. Okay, so that right or that feature is available in a convertible bond. Not all corporate bonds have this convertibility factor. If there is a convertibility nature involved, that should be specified at the time of issuing. Okay, then you have something called green bonds. Again, locally very, very rare, but internationally, they issue these to finance projects which promote environmentally or sustainable activities or sustainability related activities, to promote those or to engage in those kind of projects if they require financing and they opt for debt financing, they could issue green bonds. So green bonds, why do you use that term? To highlight that, look here, the proceeds of these bonds are going for something environmental friendly. Okay, something related to more sustainable activities. Okay, then you have callable and puttable bonds. Now this is very, very important. The others, at least using the term, you will be able to understand what they are. Usually students confuse between this callable and puttable bonds. So let's study that correctly the first instance itself, so it's easier for us. Now, first I want you to understand the term call and put. Okay. The word call involves buying. Okay. In finance, the word call would refer to the act of purchasing, act of buying. Put would essentially refer to the activity of selling. Simply think of it like this. If you're calling something, you need something, you're calling for it, which essentially means you are buying it. Putable or put, you're going to put it out there. You don't require it, or maybe you are just putting it out. Essentially involve the act of selling it. Maybe remember like that, at least that is easier for you. Now, call we know is the act of buying. Now, what is this callable bond? Callable bond is a bond, yes, we know that, which has an additional feature involved, which gives the right to buy back early than maturity. Okay, now you are issuing a bond, let's say for 10 years. So if you're issuing it today, 2021, today, it has to get matured in 2031 on the 30th of January. All right, that's the maturity period. But if the bond you are issuing is a callable bond, you are going to get the right to buy it back prior to its maturity. So you don't have to wait for 10 years. Any moment you could buy it back. Now, if it's going to give the right to buy it back, buy back, who has issued this bond? The person who's issuing is the one who's going to get the right to buy, right? So who has issued it? The company has issued this bond. So at the time of issuing, what happens? The company is selling, you, the investor, is buying on the day of issue. On the maturity, what happens? The holder or the investor, you are selling me my bond and the company is buying it back. Now in a callable bond, you don't have to wait until the maturity date. It's going to give the issuer the right to buy it back or to recall the bond before maturity. Okay, so that is what you call the callable bond. You're going to buy it back. You're going to purchase it back. Okay, so only the person who has issued can buy it back, right? The person who's already bought it can't buy it back now. Understand? So learn that the callable bond benefit or a right that comes to the issuer. Okay, callable bond gives the right to the issuer to either recall the entire bond amount or even part of the bond amount before the maturity period, which before the maturity date. All right. Now, why would an issuer do that? You have issued a bond. Why? Because you require long-term funding. Okay. So you give out a rate, interest rate, and you want to issue the bond. But halfway down the line, maybe 2 years down the line, you want to buy it back. Why? Mainly because the interest rate could have been different at that time. Okay, there can be instances where the company could have earned money, so they need to buy back as well. But all other things constant, let's say still the company has the requirement. Okay, still the company has the requirement or They don't have the funding to pay back such a bond out of their own money, but still they would want to call it back if the ongoing market interest rate has come down and they have issued the bond at a much higher interest rate. Okay. Now, I think several times I would have showed you the SoftLogic Capital's debenture. So this is a debenture done in 2019. Okay. So you can see 2019 when they issued for 5 years. Let's go for the type C. So 5 years, the interest rate was 15%. Okay, it's 15% for 5 years. So if an investor has invested in this, they are going to get 15% as their income. Let's see what if that investor has bought a treasury bill. Okay, so 5 years. Okay, I'm unable to get the 2019 rate, so might as well compare it with, okay, FD is also not appearing. Okay, let's see, you could see it here. You could see the current 5-year interest rate is only around 6 to 5%. So as an investor, if you had bought that debenture, if you had invested in that debenture, now you're going to get double the amount as interest. But now in the market, interest rate has come down. It's a single digit interest rate. So investor is at a benefit. But think about the issuer. The issuing company has raised funds and is paying 15% for a year. Okay, 15% is the annualized rate that they have to pay every 6 months on a semi-annual basis. But they could raise, if that company has got a loan from the bank, you would use the AWPLR, right? So AWPLR is in the range of 5 to 6%. They could have simply gone and taken a loan from a bank. Okay. So for the issuing company, they are bleeding. They are paying double the finance cost of what they would have paid if they had issued right now, because the market rates are down and they have committed for a much higher rate. Now think that that particular debenture is not a debenture, it's a bond, and it's a callable bond. Now who has the benefit? The issuing company now has the benefit of not waiting until maturity. So they don't have to wait for 5 years. They could call back this security. They can say, sorry, market rates have gone up, so we are going to recall this security. We will pay back your money. We will get the security back. And the company would, if they need funds again, they can't just repay and wait. They require funds. They could reissue a bond at the existing lower prices. So for the issuer, it's a benefit if their bond has a callable feature and the market rates goes down, they could reissue at a much lower cost and reduce their finance cost. But what's going to happen to the investor? If the investor has bought a callable bond, now he is in a risky situation. He knows I have invested in a callable bond, and if the market rates goes down, my issuer can always purchase it back from me. Okay, so in this situation, imagine the investor has 15% has invested in that, and now the company is coming to call it back. So you are going to lose the 15% interest income, and you might have to get the money and invest in the current lower prices or the current lower interest rate, the single digit ones. So you are going to lose out interest income. All right. So it's a benefit that comes to the issuer. The cost or the disadvantage goes to the holder. Because the holder is at a disadvantage, when you have a callable bond, usually the interest rate offered is even more higher or even more better or lucrative, just to attract the investors, because you know you are at a disadvantage if you invest in this. Okay, but to compensate for the disadvantage, they would give a much higher yield than the other ongoing bonds. Now, same thing, now the role is going to get reversed in a puttable bond. In a callable bond, who had the right? The issuer had the right. Now, in a puttable bond, the benefit and the right is going to go to the investor. That is you. If you are buying a bond now you are going to get the right. What is your right? Remember, on the first day, the issuer is the one who's selling it. You are buying it. Okay. So what is your right? To sell it back. You could sell the bond on the day of issue, you bought it. But now in a puttable bond, you get the right to sell it back to the issuer before maturity. Okay. And you don't have to wait until maturity, but you can sell it, call the issuing company and say, look here, I don't want to keep my investment in this bond, so I'm willing to sell it to you again. So they could sell it back to the issuer, and the issuer is bound to pay back the accrued interest and the capital amount. Now here the benefit goes to the buyer. Why does the buyer do this? A buyer would do this or will get the benefit from it if the market interest rates goes higher than the bond that they have invested. Again, let's go to the same scenario, the 15% bond, even though it's a debenture. If it's a 15% bond, for 5 years you have locked in, and instead of the market prices going down, let's assume that the current interest rates are around, have gone up and is now around 25%, 20%. So if the interest rates are so high, so if you go and invest in a FD now, you get 20% return. So who is losing out? As an issuer, I have locked my finance cost at 15, but the current market prices are 20. So issuer is benefiting at the moment, and you, the investor, is losing out. You could have earned much higher interest from the market. If you had invested in a puttable bond, now you have the right to sell that bond to the issuing company and get your money and invest in the increasing interest rate in the market. So you are going to get benefited from the increase in the interest rate. What happens to the issuing company? Issuing company is at a difficult position, because if it's a puttable bond and the investor exercises it, the company will now have to pay back the accrued interest and the capital, and let's say still the company needs the capital, they need funding, they can't just pay back the investment out. They would have to reissue another bond, and when they reissue, they will have to issue at a much higher price than much higher interest rate than what they issued before. Okay, so their finance cost is going to escalate. So in a callable and a puttable bond, you need to understand who has the right, issuer or the buyer, and what is that right, and from that right, who gets the benefit. Okay, so simply it's like a reverse or the mirror effect of both. Okay, are there any questions? Okay. Then you have junk bonds. Now, junk bonds and investment grade bonds are two types of bonds that depend on the credit rating. Okay, depending on the credit rating, you will decide whether that bond is an investment grade bond or whether that bond is a junk bond. So if the particular bond is rated below the investment grade by rating agencies, those are considered as junk bonds. So if what is investment grade? Investment grade is a credit rating which is BBB and above. Okay, BBB and above is considered as the investment grade. So if your bond doesn't have such a rating, if it's not BBB and it's not even above BBB, then definitely it's not in the investment grade. So then it falls into the junk bond category. So if it's a junk bond, what happens? Then it belongs to either CCC, C, those kind of categories. What does that risk rating essentially tell you? That means the issuing company or the issue itself is of high risk. There is substantial credit risk involved, whether your interest and or your capital, either or both of them has a chance of not being repaid. Okay, so junk bonds represent a very high default risk. Okay, and because these are of high default risk, or you could say high credit risk, what is going to be the interest rate offered? Can you give a low interest rate? No. If the company is desperate for funding and there's no way to improve their credit rating, they will have to go ahead with the junk bond, but they will have to give a massive or much bigger return to attract investors to invest in their bond. Okay, so in a junk bond, the interest rate given is very, very high. Okay, the main issuers of such bonds, who would issue junk bonds? Usually issuers who have a very low credit rating. Who are the issuers who have low credit rating? It could be startups who have no prior background, no prior experience, which are of high risk. Some companies which are very much capital intensive and who have high leverage. So if they have already, their debt ratios are so high, there's so much in debt, and if they go for further funding through bonds, those are considered as a high risk segment. So if the issuer belongs to such a category, usually their bond falls into the below BBB category, essentially making the bond a junk bond. Investment grade bond, I just told you, investment grade are bonds which are BBB and above. So BBB and above are considered as the investment grade. So if the bond has a rating of this particular triple B and above, it's considered as the investment grade bond. And an investment grade bond, what does it indicate? It indicates low risk. So it like fall around A plus, double A, triple A, triple B plus. Those are the categories. So if they fall in that particular bucket, those are considered low risk. And if it's low risk, the compensation paid out is also low. So low interest rate involved. Now, recently you should be aware that we got downgraded. Okay. So when we got downgraded, we are now in the triple C category. So where is triple C? We are in this particular category. Earlier, I think we were substantial risk, and now we are moving into the extreme speculative bucket. So these are the three rating agencies and their matrix. See if I could zoom it out for you. Okay. So usually you cut off from here, even though triple B minus is considered as a better rating. For bond issues, they are not. Minimum is the triple B. Anything above, you take it as an investment grade. Anything below falls into the junk bond category. Okay. Remember, because why? You're not sure. You're not sure whether your interest will come back. You're not sure whether your principal will come back. So for lower the credit rating, you will have to pay high interest. Here, you can pay low interest. Why? You have a better credit rating, a higher credit rating. Okay. So when you have a higher credit rating, that is like a marketing tool. Say, look, okay, you give us your money, invest in our bond, we will definitely pay you back. There is no any doubt or a chance of default risk. But for a junk bond, it doesn't work like that. And another one I want you to understand is that not only companies are rated, even the issues, the bond issue is rated. So that's why we see whether that bond issue has that particular rating. I'm not sure whether you're aware of it, but let me show it to you. If you visit, you know, in Sri Lanka, we have Fitch or ICRA. One of these two are the rating agencies who are actively there. Usually to access the Fitch credit rates, rating reports, I think you need a special login and all, but ICRA is freely available for you to look at it. So these are all the companies which have been rated, and I'm trying to show you a bit of so here you only have a issuer rating, which means they have only rated the company, the issuer who's issuing it. Okay, that's why you have a issuer rating. But here you could see this particular company has been rated, Access Engineering has been rated, and one of their debt issues has also been rated. Now, remember on Thursday when we discussed, we saw that disadvantages of debt financing is you need to have a credit rating. So you need to get assessed. You have to spend money on that. There is a risk that you can get downgraded, so which is the impact to you. Okay. So that is what you're looking at the moment. So issuer get the rating and any one of their issues as well. So this is a debenture that they issue. what is the amount of the debenture and what kind of a rating does that debenture issue has. Okay. Again, here you could see commercial papers as well. They have got a credit rating involved. So when this kind of a issue falls, this issue gets rated below BBB, it falls into the junk bond category. Now, as an issuer, we are around CCC. So if we issue a bond, will it get AA rated? If the issuer is bad, will the instrument that we are issuing get a better rating? Does not happen like that, because it depends. The issue, the repayment of the issue depends on the issuer. So usually the issuer's rating is very much more linked to the issue rating as well. Okay. So if we are CCC and if we go to the international market and trying to raise funds right now, it will be absurd. Our bond is more or less like a junk bond. Okay. So another category that we have is the floating rate bonds, or you could call it the floating rate notes. What are these bonds? These are bonds which carry a floating coupon rate. Now, why is it a different category? Usually, bonds come with fixed rates, fixed interest rates. Okay. Here you could see, that's why I've mentioned it here. They usually come with fixed interest rate, but remember, our financial market is always evolving, always coming up with new products. So we have this floating rate bonds, which are bonds whose coupon rate is now a floating interest rate. So what is a floating interest rate? The interest rate of that bond is linked to a market benchmark. What do you mean by market benchmark? There is an interest rate that is widely accepted by the financial community as the indicator of market rates. Now, locally, we have AWPLR, average weighted prime lending rate. Okay, the average weighted prime lending rate is an indicative rate. It's the average rate in which the loans give. So the banks give out loans to prime customers. So that is an indicative rate for you. So you could add a margin to this rate and give out as a floating interest rate. On international scale, we use LIBOR. So far and even now, LIBOR, when it gets discontinued, we will replace with what is there. Okay, so using that benchmark, you link up a margin. Now that margin is a reflection of the issuer's risk. If the issuer and the issue is of high risk and they need to compensate and they need to offer a much higher interest rate than the other products, then the margin is very high. But let's say the issuer is very, very strong, credit risk involved is low. To reflect that, they could offer a lower margin, and in some scenarios, it could be even lower than the market benchmark, which means a negative margin as well. But usually, a floating rate bond is a bond with a coupon rate linked to a market benchmark. Then you have Euro bonds and foreign bonds. Now, this is something we discussed in our second lecture where we talked about classification of financial markets, the domestic and the international. So let's see what are these two types, and let me clearly show it to you on a diagrammatical basis. Now, we learned what is a Euro bond or what's a Euro market. It's a bond or instrument that you issue not only in one country, you are going to do the issue simultaneously to several countries. and if you're going to do the issue simultaneously to several countries, can that issue be subjected to the laws of just one country? No. It has to be beyond the jurisdiction of any single country. Okay, so it will be more of an internationally done syndicate, or international basis is how it will get covered. Okay, so Eurobond is an international instrument where it is issued by a foreign entity, and the issue is done in a different currency to the country in which you are issuing. Okay, so here 3 factors are going to be different. The entity is a foreign entity, that is one. The issue that you are doing, that issue is going to get denominated in a different currency than the country in which you are issuing. So if you're issuing in Sri Lanka and you're issuing the instrument in, not in rupees, but if you're issuing it in Sri Lanka and you're doing it in US dollars, and the issuer is from, let's say, Australia. So all 3 factors here are different. Okay, that's what you call a Eurobond. Now, because these instruments are international, these are bearer bonds. It has to get transacted globally. So you can't have just one location. You can't have just registered bonds that doesn't give the transferability. It has to be bearer bonds, which allows the instrument to get globally traded. Okay, so what is example that we have here? So if a company in UK decides to issue a Canadian dollar bond, but they're doing an issue in the Japanese market and the Australian market. Okay, so different country, the currency in which they're issuing is also different, and the company is also from a different location. So depending on that, you have the term for the bond varies. So if you're going to do a dollar bond issue, okay, you're going to do a dollar bond issue. Your bond issue is in the term of dollars. Okay, but you're doing this bond issue not in USA. Okay, US dollars is the currency of USA, but you're not doing this issue in USA. You are doing this issue in any other country other than USA. But this issuer is a non-US company. Then it's called a Euro dollar bond. Example, you have a UK company issuing bonds in dollars, let's say in China, in Japan. Okay, so that would be a Euro dollar bond. Another example is the Euro yen bond, very much similar. The issue is denominated in yen. Okay, but you are not going to issue it in Japan. You are going to issue it in any other country other than Japan. And who is the issuer? Is the issuer a Japanese company? No. The issuer is a non-Japanese company. Then it is called the Euro yen bonds. Now this Euro bond is very different than the foreign bond. Foreign bond, you have only 2 factors. Now you have 3 proportions I've told you. The issuer, the issue denomination, and the issuing country. In a foreign bond, the split happens by only 2 things or 2 other differentiating items. In foreign bonds, the country that you're issuing and the currency in which you are issuing is going to be similar. So if you are issuing it in Japan and you're issuing it in yen, but in a foreign bond, the issuer is going to be a foreigner. The issuer is a non-national. The issuer is a non-domestic company. All right. So foreign bonds are bonds issued by non-domestic companies in their domestic market, in the relevant domestic capital, in the domestic currency. Example, in Sri Lanka, there is a bond issue done in rupees in Sri Lanka. So in our domestic capital market and in our domestic currency, the issue is being done. But it is issued by a company which is not a domestic company, which is issued by a Chinese company. Okay, then it's called a foreign bond. Again, the term foreign bond is a broader term. Depending on the type of the bond, you have different names to the bond. You have samurai bond, Yankee bond, if it's in US dollars and you do it in US, but the issuer is not a US person. Okay. Then you have panda bond relating to China. Okay. Samurai is relating to Japan. So here, remember you have three: issuer, issue denomination, issuing country. In Eurobond, all three were different. In a foreign bond, issuer is different, but denominator and currency and issuing market is going to be same. All right. I hope it's clear for you. Let's see this diagram. So to ease out everything. Now, if you are a UK company and you issue an instrument in sterling pounds and you're issuing it in UK, then in what market are you operating? You are operating in the domestic bond market. Example, you have, let's say, Damro in Sri Lanka issuing debentures in rupees. Let's say they're issuing a bond. They're issuing a bond in rupees to the Sri Lankan market. Then it's a domestic bond. Okay. But if the issuer who is based in UK goes to a different country and is issuing the instrument in that country, in that particular country's currency, then it's called a foreign bond. Similar to Sri Lanka. Again, think about, let's say, Damro. They go to Japan and they're issuing a bond in yen. Then it's the foreign bond. What kind of an instrument are they issuing then? It's a foreign bond. More specifically, it's a samurai bond. You would have heard this word samurai because our central bank was evaluating a samurai bond issue, which means our country's central bank is going to issue an instrument in Japan in yen terms. Okay. The issuer is a non-Japanese entity. So obviously central bank is the Sri Lankan central bank. They're not a Japanese company or Japanese entity. Okay. So then it's a foreign bond market. What is a Euro bond market? Completely different. All three are going to be different. A company based in UK, they're going to raise yen, but they're going to raise in countries who do not have yen as their domestic currency. It could be Germany and France or any other country, Australia and Canada. But remember, it's going to be simultaneously in more than one country. Okay. So that's how these three are different. You could again read this in line to our second chapter or the second lesson that we did, the very last bit. We classify market as per their origin. Okay, so have a read on that and come back and read this, study this diagram. It will be very much clear for you. Okay. What are the risks that are associated with bonds? If you invest in a bond, is it risk-free? Or are there going to be any risks which the investor or the issuer going to face? So first and foremost, when they talk about any risk relating to bond, what is the primary risk that should come into your mind? The interest rate risk. What is interest rate risk? Interest rate risk is the probability that the value of your bond is going to decline depending on the market interest fluctuations. So if the market interest rates are increasing, your bond price is going to be decreasing. We know bond and price, the interest rate and bond price are inversely related. When the interest rate increases, bond prices decline. Okay, so this scenario, when it happens after you invest in a bond, is what you call the interest rate risk. Now, interest rate risk is much higher in a fixed income bond than a floating bond. And let me explain you why. Now, I want you to assume that you hold a bond, okay? You hold a bond which has a residual period of 2 years, okay? Now, your bond pays annual rate, interest rate of 10%, which is fixed, okay? Now, let's assume this is what you have invested. Now, assume that the market condition in these 2 years, the market condition is going to be that the first half of the year, interest rates were very low. Okay, let's say interest rate was very low. So closer to around 5%, let's say. And then after that, after maybe June, the interest rate started to pick up closer to, let's say, approximately around 12%. And then again, it started going very, very high, 16%. And then around the last 3 months, it has started to decline again to maybe 3%. This is how the market interest rate has fluctuated. Now, because you have invested in a fixed bond, okay, you have invested in a fixed rate bond, 10%. Is your interest rate going to change as per market interest rates? Because it is fixed and not floating, the market rate is not going to impact on your interest rate. Now, remember, listen to the words that I'm using. It's not going to impact on your interest rate. Just because it became 12, your rate is not going to increase. It's going to be 10 itself. Okay. Now, let's mirror what's happening to this bond price now. After you purchase this bond, remember, in the secondary market, you could always trade these bonds. So in the secondary market, how are the prices determined? Based on the demand and supply. Okay. Now, when the market interest rate is 5%, what does it mean? If I go to the market and invest, the return I'm going to get is 5%. Okay. But the bond you are holding is giving 10%. Is your bond more lucrative or not? Yes. It's giving you a higher return. So will you sell it? No, you will hold to it. So on a supply side of the bond holders are going to reduce supply. You are not going to sell it to the market because it's more beneficial for you. Now, I don't have that bond. You are the one who are holding. You are the one who's holding it. Now I look at it and say, oh my God, that's giving me 10, that's giving the person 10%. I would like to own something like that. And I would put my demand, I would start demanding for that product or that bond. Okay, so just like me, other investors also, when the market interest rates are lower than what the bond is offering, we would prefer the bond. So in the secondary market, supply is less, demand is more, your bond price, the bond price is going to be higher. Okay, it's going to be higher. Now let's say in the second half, we saw that the market interest rate has increased to 12%. Okay, which means in the market, if I invest in a product, I would get 12% as my interest income. But you are giving, your bond gives only 10%. Okay, so new investor, as a new investor, will I be interested in your bond? No, I will say I'll get additional 2% from the other market products. Why am I going to buy yours? So demand is going to drop. On a supply angle, what are you going to see? You're going to say, oh my God, I locked in for 10%. Market is offering 12%. I might as well sell this now and invest in the market interest rate. I would get a higher rate. Then the supply side, so many sellers would come into the market to sell this bond, increasing the supply. Supply increases, the demand decreases. Ideally, the bond price of your bond, the price of your bond will start to decline. Okay. Now, if now in the latter part, it has now come up to 16% interest rate, which means now more than your bond, market is giving 6%. It's going to get worse. Your bond price is now going to get drastically low. Okay, very much low. Then, at the latter end, interest rate starts to decline. Now it's 3%. Your bond is now going to get more attractive. One is higher interest rate, and now it's more closer to the maturity as well. So again, your market price is going to go up. So the inverse relationship happens because of this. Okay. So what happens in the interest rate risk? Now, throughout this entire diagram, okay, what are the risk areas to you as a holder holding this bond? What were the risk areas? Which was this? When the price increased, you are at a benefit, right? When the market interest rate dropped and your bond price increased, it's a benefit for you. You can sell your bond in the secondary market at a much higher price. Okay. It is when the market interest rate increased that you were at a disadvantage. So this is the area of interest rate risk. Why? The market interest rate has increased and now you are facing the issue of lower bond prices and lower return. Okay, that is the risk for you as a holder of the bond. That is the risk situation coming for you. Okay, that is what is mentioned here. The value of your asset is now going to decline due to the increase in the market interest rate. Now let's say this 10% is a floating interest rate. If it's a floating interest rate, the fluctuations or the degree of fluctuations will be, the pattern will be similar, but the degree in which it fluctuates will be much minimal. Why? Because if the market interest rate is increasing, my coupon rate is going to increase as well. Okay, let's say AWPLR increase and PLR plus 2 is my margin. My bond rate is also going to increase. Okay, So there is some kind of a interest rate, again, interest rate risk for a floating bond as well, but the impact is much lesser. I hope it's clear for you. Okay. Then you have credit risk. Now the credit risk to the holder are because there is a possible issue with the possible credit risk problem with the bond issuer. What if the bond issuer defaults? What if the bond issuer doesn't pay me back my interest or my return? Okay, my interest or my principal. So for the holder, there is an additional risk where he faces in terms of the credit risk. Now, credit risk, if the credit risk of a bond increases, the return that the investor expects is also going to increase. Okay, would demand for a better rate to compensate for that higher risk. Now, credit risk comes in two ways. If you can just note it down, credit risk comes either in the form of a default, so default risk, and the other is a downgrade risk. So default risk is essentially the risk of the person defaulting on your interest or your principal or even both. What is downgrade risk? You were assessed at a much higher credit rating, and now during the tenure of the bond, you are getting downgraded. So that downgrade indicates a higher credit risk. Okay. So credit risk can come from the two ways, default risk or the downgrade risk. Then you have liquidity risk. Very simple. You have invested in the bond as a holder. Okay. Now, if you have bought the bond, when is your principal going to come? At the end of your maturity. But if you need funds, you would want to go to the secondary market and sell it. But if you are unable to get the market value of the bond from the secondary market due to its illiquid nature, because there are no buyers for these bonds who are willing to pay the price, and because there's less buyers, you have to sell it at a much lower price. Okay, so that gives the liquidity risk to the holder. Then you have exchange rate risk. Exchange rate risk is essentially if you have invested in a bond whose cash flow is going to come in forex terms. So you have invested in a dollar bond and the interest is paid in dollars. Now you bring the dollars, come here. What if the rupee has appreciated? Very rare, but if rupee has appreciated, you are going to be in a loss. Okay. Inflation risk. Very, very simple. You earn interest. Usually bonds carry a fixed interest. So your interest is fixed, as the example, let's say 10%. Irrespective of the inflation increasing, your interest is going to be at 10%. So if the inflation is high, your real income from that 10% return is going to decline, forcing you or making you vulnerable to the inflation risk in the market. What is this yield curve risk? Yield curve risk is the impact on the bond prices that comes because the yield curve has shifted, but not in a parallel manner. Okay, I'm going to explain that to you in detail. Now, we have studied what a yield curve is, shows the relationship between the maturity and the yield rates offered for each maturity. Okay, so if the yield curve, let's say this is the original yield curve, okay, and now the market interest rates have increased by 25 basis points, which means 0.25% has increased across all tenors. So the 5-year one will also increase. The 20-year one will also increase. The 30-year one will also increase. So the increase is a parallel increase across all tenors. Okay. That is minimal. So when there is a parallel shift, there is no yield curve risk. Okay. Both, so if you had borrowed short term and lent for long term, both the interest rates are now going to increase. Okay. But what if the increase is not parallel? This is your usual yield curve, but now market interest rate has increased. It has increased in such a way that the short term rate has increased by a very low amount, by this 0.2%. But the long term interest rate has increased by close to 0.5%. Okay. So if something like this happens, you are going to be at a risk. Not only short term increase is lower than the long term, even if it happens other way about. Say your short term rate has increased much higher, but your long term rate is very, very low. Your short term increase is higher and your long term investment or your long term interest rate has increased by a very small amount. Again, that's going to be an issue for the holder. Why it's going to be there? Because remember, throughout the yield curve, you might borrow and invest. Okay, so when you do the borrowing and investing, if you had borrowed short term and lent long term, and if something like this happens, you are at a huge problem. Okay. And if you had borrowed for a long term and given for on a revolving short term basis, again, when such a scenario happens, you're going to be in an issue. Okay. This is what we indicate by the yield curve risk. Let me show it you by an example. So assume that you are a bank, let's say, you have borrowed, okay, you have borrowed short term and you have invested in a 1 year loan. You are given out a 1 year loan to one person. Okay. Now, when you have taken the short term deposit, the deposit rate that you have advertised is, I'm willing to accept the short term deposits at 3 months treasury bill plus 2%. Okay. And on the other side, you have advertised that you are willing to lend for 1 year at 1 year treasury bill plus 2%. Okay. Now, let's say currently in the market, your 3-day treasury bill is at 8%. Okay. And your 1 year treasury bill is at 12%. Okay. So when you accepted the deposit, you are going to pay 8 plus 2%, which is 10%. Okay. When you are going to give out the loan is going to be 1 year treasury bill plus 2%, which is 14%. Now, what is your margin? You get a margin of 4%. Okay. Okay, so the margin is around 4%. But let's say the short-term rates have now increased and the long-term rates has not increased at all. So then the 3-month treasury bill rate, which was 8% before, has now come up to 10%. Okay, which means 10 plus 2%, now you have to pay 12% on your deposit rate. but your 1-year lending rate has not increased. There's no change. It's still at 14. Then your margin is now going to decline to 2%, giving you the risk coming from the yield curve. Okay, that's what you call the yield curve risk. Finally, you have this reinvestment risk. What is this reinvestment risk? It is the risk that the holder faces where you are unable to find an investment opportunity which will pay you as high as your current bond. Now, earlier we saw there was a bond which is paying 15%. Okay. And current market rates are going around 6 to 5%. Okay. Now, let's say that debenture is maturing today and they are going to pay you your principal and interest. Tomorrow, what are you going to do? You will have to reinvest. And when you reinvest, what happens? You're going to reinvest at 6 or 5%. You are losing out on a higher interest income. Your new security is going to get you a lower interest income. Okay, so you are the one who is faced with a high reinvestment risk, because when you reinvest, you're going to invest at a much lower rate. Okay. Now, I want you to understand something in this diagram. I know it's a bit messy, but let's see whether you could understand. Now, I told you in this slot, the holder was facing interest rate risk. Okay. Interest rate risk, which means the market interest rates were going up and that was declining your bond prices. So if you had sold your bond in the market, you had to sell at a very low price. Okay. But if you had sold your bond in the low rate, the low price, and you had come to the market with the money to reinvest, you get the opportunity to reinvest at a much higher rate. Which means, are you facing a reinvestment risk? No. Let's see about these two. Now, in this timeline, the market rate was 5% and you were getting 10% income. If you had sold your bond then and come to the market, you will have to reinvest at a lower interest rate, which would be 5%, which means now you are exposed to reinvestment risk. Same thing here. At the latter end, still you were getting 10% interest rate, but the market rate was 3%. Now you're closer to maturity as well. When this matures and you bring in the money to the market, you will have to invest at even close to 3 or 2%, which means reinvestment risk. So ideally, reinvestment and interest rate risk are like the mirror of the situation. The opposite happens. Okay. And another one I want you to recall. Remember, we studied callable and puttable bonds. Okay. Now, in a callable bond, what happens? The issuer has the right to call back the security before maturity. And when would this happen? When the interest rates are low, when the interest rates are declining. So, something like this situation. So, when the issuer recalls in this situation, when the market interest rate is low, what happens to the holder? Holder will get the money and will have to go to the market and invest at a lower rate. So, in a callable bond, the holder faces a very high reinvestment risk. That is why, because there's an additional risk that the holder faces in a callable bond, the bond interest itself, the interest rate that the bond carry at the time of issuing itself is much higher to compensate for this reinvestment risk. Okay, so if you can note down that as well. Okay. See, bonds are vulnerable to reinvestment risk as the bonds are typically redeemed when the interest rates decline. Okay. So now we move to the types of bonds that we have in the local market. Before we move to the sukuk and then the debentures, let's see what are the bonds in our local market that we have at the moment. So we saw our government issues two LKR denominated securities. One is the treasury bill, which belongs to the money market, and then you have treasury bond, which belongs to the capital market. We know that this is a medium and to a long-term debt instrument. Last week, we saw the timeline in which they sell it. We saw that maximum of 30 years is what they go for. So it could range from 2 to 30 years. Here you could see it could range from 2 to 30 years. So medium to long term. All right. Why do they issue it? They issue for their long-term budgetary requirements. If they have any specific development projects, okay, then they would issue a treasury bond. So did treasury bills carry an interest rate? No, they were discount instruments. So they had a face value. The treasury bill had a face value on the time that they were issuing, but the issue price was lower than the face value. So that on maturity, the holder gets the face value and earns the difference as the interest. So treasury bills were not interest bearing securities, or they were zero coupon securities. But treasury bonds, which could go from a medium to long term tenor, are interest bearing securities. Therefore, they do carry a coupon rate. Usually the coupon payment happens every 6 months. Okay, so on a biannual basis, the coupon payment is done. Now, treasury bonds we know are issued in LKR terms, and therefore they are considered as the safest of all instruments. Why? It's issued in LKR. Government can always at least even print LKR and pay you back. So the default risk is considered to be nil. Okay. So even though it's a government issue bond, who is actually handling this issue? Central bank, specifically the public debt department. They conduct the auctions, they do the issue, they pay the interest on time, and they repay the principal on maturity. Okay. Now, just like what we saw in a treasury bill, there are two types of treasury bond markets. You have the primary treasury bond market, and then you have the secondary treasury bond market. So in the primary market, it was central bank and primary dealer, and then in the primary market, and then in the secondary market, you have primary dealer and the public involved. So does that mean that in the primary, public doesn't get involved at all? They don't get involved directly, but they could always put forward their bid through a primary dealer. They are not physically or directly present there. They can give their bid to the representative, the primary dealer, and the primary dealer puts forward the bid on behalf of the public. What is the minimum bid amount or the purchased amount? Which it's around 5 million rupees. Okay. From 2004 onwards, we saw a development in our treasury bond market, where we saw both the bills and the bonds being issued in a paperless form. Okay, so it's not, you don't have to transfer on a paper based, it's all electronic at the moment. So all the purchases and the sales, even the maturity, is updated on an electronic basis using Lanka Secure system, which is managed by the central bank. Okay, so how we saw how these treasury bonds are traded in the primary market. It's issued for the first time by the primary dealer, and then the primary dealer will approach or the work with the public to sell it in the secondary market. For an individual or for the public, they could approach the primary dealer in the secondary market and get the money, or they could give or share their bid to the primary dealer, and then the primary dealer can approach the primary market and put forward the bid and get the treasury bond. Okay, so interest payment and even the maturity, everything comes through the primary dealer, because central bank directly works with the primary dealer. So every 6 months, the interest relating to that ISIN number or relating to that particular bond is issued by the central bank to the primary dealer. Primary dealer will then allocate that interest to all the treasury bond holders. Okay. What are the features of treasury bills? It's considered risk-free, gilt-edged debt instrument. What is this gilt edge? That's the term you use when it's a fixed income given by the government. For treasury bonds, usual maturity is between 2 to 30 years. The coupon payment is done on a half-yearly basis, and the principal is paid on maturity. This instrument has an active secondary market. So it's a tradable instrument, and the instrument is in the form of a scripless security. Okay, which is important. Now, what are the benefits of investing in a treasury bond? To any investor, it's a risk-free investment because it's issued by the sovereign government. Because it's credit risk-free, you are sure you will get your money back. Okay, and these are tradable in the secondary market, and the secondary market is very active and liquid. This, along with the less or the risk-free nature, increases the marketability of a treasury bond. So liquidity of this instrument is very, very high. The repayment of your interest and the maturity proceed, irrespective of even the 30-year period, is certain for you. And the other benefit is it's much more easier to do your trades now, because it's in a scriptless form and all the trades are now on an automated basis. So all your holdings are updated on an electronic basis. So let's see what are the platforms involved in the treasury bond or the treasury bill market per se. It's the Lanka Secure system that handles this settlement, the recording of the primary issue. So when a treasury bond or bill gets issued for the first time, what is the issue? What is the ISIN number? Who are the ones who purchased it? How it was disseminated? How the funds were settled? All are recorded there. And then even after the primary market issue, whenever that treasury bill or bond gets traded in the secondary market, those are also updated in the Lanka Secure system. So in the Lanka Secure system, you have two components. You have the scriptless securities settlement system, which handles the electronic settlement of the transaction. And then you have the central depository system, which is like a database where you have the updated holdings of the treasury bill and the bond market. So what does the scriptless security settlement system do? That is your electronic settlement arrangement. Instantly, the security, the cash for the security is settled and the transaction is effected, and the security is transferred from one person to another with a mere electronic data entry. So what does the central depository system do? Where they are going to update the holdings. Now let's say you have sold a treasury bill to me. Okay, so what a scriptless security settlement system does is it will do this transaction settlement to us. From the money will get credited, and from your account the treasury bond will move to my account. Okay, now let's see, I'm a brand new person coming into this market. In the CDS, a new account is created for me, and then the treasury bill gets deducted from your account and get added on to my account. So that where is the security, who is holding the security, that updated investor list is done in the central depository system. Okay, so central depository system is essentially like a database which gives you the updated holdings of the government security. So who holds what, all those information is available in the CDS. Then we have two other securities, Sri Lanka Development Bond and International Sovereign Bonds. Now these two are forex denominated instruments. More specifically, these are US dollar denominated instruments issued by our government. So what are the LKR denominated instruments? We have treasury bill and the treasury bond. And then forex, we have two instruments denominated in the dollar terms, which is called the Sri Lanka Development Bond and the International Sovereign Bond. Okay, so let's see what their main features are and how these two are different from each other. Okay, now SLDBs are debt instrument. We know government cannot issue equity, and these debt instruments are denominated in dollar terms to raise dollar funds. Okay, and because it's issued by the government here, can it say no credit risk? No. They have to guarantee their own payment. They have to say that they undertake to repay. They have to assure that, because there is some kind of a credit risk involved here because the denomination is in dollar terms. Now, this Sri Lanka Development Bond is issued to the domestic market. So it's done locally. It's issued to the local market. Okay. Now, you know, dollar, which is forex, can it be freely traded? Can it be freely exchanged like rupee? No, we have forex controls imposed. We have certain guidelines in which you can use the foreign exchange. Okay, so investment for this product in a secondary market is limited. So that's why you say there is no active secondary market for this bond. Okay, other main features of these are, in a development bond, again just as a treasury bill or treasury bond, the interest payment or the coupon payment is done on a semi-annual basis. That is similar to both the bond and even the international sovereign bond. Okay, but the Sri Lanka Development Bond, the usual tenor is between the 2 to 5 years. So more like a mid-range is what they're looking at. 2 to 5 years is the maturity period. Okay, and the investment currency we know is in dollar terms. Minimum is 10,000 and it's in multiples of 10. And this bond has the ability to carry either the fixed interest rate or either a flexible interest rate. So it can be, the interest rate can be fixed or it can be pegged or linked to a market benchmark rate, and it will move according to that benchmark rate. So what is the benchmark that we use for SLDB? It's the 6-month LIBOR for US dollar. 6 months dollar LIBOR is the benchmark rate that we use for the Sri Lanka Development Bond. Now we studied that looking at the ISIN number, we can say several details of this product, correct? So if the ISIN of a Sri Lanka development bond carries the term LKG at the beginning, then it's a floating rate. If it's LKH, if it's a fixed rate. That's just for your knowledge purpose. Okay. And this security, because it is issued in the domestic market and because there is no active secondary market for it, this is issued in a paper form. It's not a paperless form. This is issued in a paper form. Okay. Then we have the international sovereign bonds. These were issued much more recently from 2007 onwards, again issued by the government, and the repayment is guaranteed by the government. Now, because you are issuing to the international market, can you say, sorry, this product cannot be transacted in the secondary market? No, they buy this instrument to sell it in the secondary market, correct? So there is an active secondary market to this bond. Again, the payment is on a semi-annual basis that they do. The investment currency is in dollar terms, but the term that you're looking at, the tenor that you're looking at is now going to be a longer term. 5 to 10 year is what you're looking at. Okay. This instrument, unlike the Sri Lanka development bond, is only issued in a fixed interest rate. It does not carry a floating rate. That's another difference. And finally, this you are issuing it to the international market. Can you issue a paper-based instrument? No. It comes in a scriptless form. So you can see there are 5 differences between the SLDBs and the international sovereign bonds, or the ISBs. Okay. Finally, we come to the Sukuk, or the Islamic bond. This is the last type of the bond that we are going to cover. And then we have the debentures. Now, Sukuk bonds are asset-backed securities. That is the important term here. These are considered as debt, but they are not essentially a debt instrument. Okay, they are going to be backed by a asset. What is different in a Sukuk bond is the Sukuk bond has both the features of a debt instrument and an equity instrument. Now, what are the features of equity can you see in the Sukuk bond? If you invest in a Sukuk bond, you don't get, it's not a credit claim that you get. You get the ownership over the underlying project or the underlying business. Okay, so you get the ownership here, even though it's a bond, even though it's a debt. You can see why I've said not a debt instrument. It gives you the ownership. The other difference is that you're not going to get interest. You are going to get a share of profit. So if that underlying project or the business earns a profit, you're going to get a share from it. Okay, a part of that profit is going to come to you. That's the other difference, the second one. Third one, the third feature that you see on equity similarity is that the amount might be repaid at the end of it. Okay, why? Because it's ownership, it's more like equity, remember? So in case the underlying business earns a loss, you as a Sukuk bondholder will have to bear it. Okay, so that's the fourth difference. The performance of the underlying instrument is going to affect you. Okay, so if it does a profit, if it earns a profit, it will come back to you. If it's a loss, again you have to bear the loss. Okay, so those are the features which are much similar to equity that you see in a Sukuk bond. But what is that one feature that you say that it's a debt instrument, is that Sukuk bond carry a specific maturity date. So when the maturity comes back, the issuer has to pay back the amount, whatever the amount that is remaining. Okay, so in equity you don't have that. So that's the difference, or that's the debt feature that you find in a Sukuk bond. Now here I have compared a conventional bond with a Sukuk bond. Okay, so in a conventional bond you get the debt obligation. Okay, it's an obligation that you get. But in a Sukuk bond, it is the ownership that you get. So depending on the amount that you invest, you get part of their ownership. So that's why you call it the partial ownership. Okay, so you get the ownership over the underlying asset of the Sukuk bond. Now, investment to a normal bond is can be invested in anything as long as the local rules and regulation are okay with it. You can invest in any project. But Sukuk bonds are issued for assets or projects which are only Sharia compliant. So let's say you are, it's a business which violates the Sharia law. I think if it's a liquor related, let's say certain meat related, then those are not the valid or qualifying investments to issue a Sukuk bond. In terms of the issue unit, each unit or one bond would represent a share of debt. But in a Sukuk, each bond represents the ownership share. Okay. The bond is going to be depending on the issuer's rating, which essentially reflects the issuer's creditworthiness. Okay. But the face value of a Sukuk bond is going to depend on the underlying asset. The value of the asset is going to reflect in the issue price of the Sukuk bond. Okay. Now, what is the investment reward that the holder gets? For a conventional bond, the interest. Irrespective of whether the underlying project meaning the funds that you invest is going to get routed to something, right? Some kind of a project or asset or a business. Whether that business earns a profit or a loss, your interest is secured. The interest payment has to be done. Your principal has to be paid. Okay. But Sukuk bond is more like equity, remember? So when the performance is good, you will get your profits. But if there is a loss, you have to bear the loss. So if there is a loss, it will get deducted from your investment amount. Okay. What are the effects of costs we have? We know that a conventional bondholder doesn't get affected by the performance of the underlying asset. So whether the underlying project is an excellent project, loss-making project, nothing impacts them. The agreement says principal has to be paid back at maturity, interest has to be paid back. Okay, so those are commitments, those are obligations. Okay, but the Sukuk holder is affected by the cost relating to the asset. Okay, so if that project, let's say, carries a higher cost involving a loss, now that cost escalation affects the bondholder's return. Okay, so these are the criteria in which a Sukuk bond differs from a conventional bond. Okay. Finally, we have debentures. We saw that these were long-term source of raising debt mainly by companies. Again, these are just like other debt instruments. You get your interest and then your principal gets paid back at the end on the maturity date. Okay, so the debenture holder is treated like a creditor to the company. The company has obtained a loan from them. Okay. Now, throughout the period of the debenture, interest has to be paid. Usually, they go for a biannual interest. Sometimes it can be a annual as well. Mostly, they carry a fixed rate. But now you can see whenever there is a debenture issue, there is a floating component to it as well. Now I think I closed it. Here you can see majority of the issue is in fixed, but there is a part of issue which is done in floating to attract that market as well. Okay. So what are the types of debentures available? So depending on the security, you can divide the debentures into two. You have secured debentures where there is an asset which is backing that debenture. So in case that debenture interest or the principal is not paid, the debenture holder has a direct charge on that asset. Unsecured meaning there is no any direct right on the asset of the company. Let's say you are an unsecured debenture holder and the company defaults. You have to go through the usual liquidation process, and you will be paid according to the liquidity matrix or the settlement matrix, which involves secured debt first, unsecured debt first, then the general creditors. The same or the order that you have for any other liquidation is what they will apply for you. But if you are a secured debenture holder, you have a specific asset which is your security. So they will directly sell that security and settle your amount. Based on interest rate, you can divide the debentures into two, fixed rate and floating rate debentures. And then again, based on redemption also, you could divide it. If the debenture carries a fixed period at the end of which the maturity of on maturity your principal will be paid back, it's called redeemable debentures. There are also certain debentures which are non-redeemable. That means until the company is closed down, you are unable to get your principal back. Again, very rare on a practical basis, but there is a type available. Based on recording, you could classify the debentures. One type is the registered debenture, where you physically record the details of the debenture holder in a debenture register. So after you record it, the transfers are not allowed. That means those kind of debentures are not allowed to be transferred or negotiated. But second category what you have is the bearer debenture. Their debentures are transferable by mere delivery. So there is no any record of debenture holders in a register. You could freely transfer the debenture. Finally, I think finally you have debentures classified based on convertibility. So if the debenture gives you the right to convert the debenture at the end of the period into shares, it's called convertible debentures, or else the others are called the non-convertible debentures, which are usually the redeemable debentures, where at the end of it you cannot convert it into equity. Your interest, your principal will be paid back on maturity. Okay. Finally, let's see the advantages of a debenture and the disadvantages of a debenture to the issuer. Now here, very much more similar to the advantages of a debt financing that we saw before. But the major benefit why they go for debentures is it doesn't dilute that particular entity's ownership. So it's easier for them in their decision making. Second is the benefit of tax. We saw that because debenture interest is tax deductible, therefore the issuer gets the benefit of paying lower taxes. Okay. And because there is no ownership given out, they don't have to share the profits available. Okay, so the issuer doesn't have to split the shares in the terms of dividends to the debenture holder. Just paying their interest is sufficient. And because ownership entitlement is not given to the debenture holder, they cannot involve in the business matter. They cannot involve in decision making. Okay, so the issuer can do business on their own without any interference. Finally, the issue cost of a debenture is much lower than equity instrument. Why? The rules and regulations are much convenient, much more flexible. The disclosure requirements are much more less. Okay, therefore the issue cost is very much more less for a debenture. But what are the disadvantages? You are obligated to pay interest. For an equity holder, you can defer your dividend. Now, especially think about a pandemic or a COVID situation like what we faced. Irrespective of whether your company was closed down or not, you have to pay your debenture interest. You cannot default it, but dividends you can. You can defer it. You can not pay for a year. That ability or that therefore debenture issuers. Then the capital that you raised has to be paid back. Now for equity, there is no requirement like that. It's a complete inflow to the company where the company doesn't have to pay it back at any time. But for debenture, no, at the end of when it matures, they have to pay back the borrowed capital. Okay, so it's not a long-term financing method. And when you borrow through a debenture, it's a debt. So it's a loan which will increase the gearing level of the company, can be detrimental to your leverage ratios, can be detrimental on your credit obligations and even the risk ratings. Okay. And finally, you have certain covenants being imposed if you are a debenture issuer. The investors could say, look here, as debenture holders, we don't have the right over your business matters. We cannot involve in your business decisions. Okay, but at the time of investing itself, we want to tell you, you can't do certain things. You have to do certain things. Okay, so these are conditions which they impose. We will talk about the term covenant in the later slides, where you have positive covenants and negative covenants. But when a covenant is imposed, that is going to impact the issuer. They have to act in a certain way, adhering to the covenant. Okay, so these four were the disadvantages to a issuer when they issue debenture to the market. So with that, let's wind down the lecture for today. Next week, when we start up, we will go through the bond terminology. Now, next week is a very important lecture where we'll have the bond terminology that we talked about in detail with minor calculations. You could see we talk about the covenants as well. Then we move to bond valuation. How are we going to value the bond? What are the factors affecting this bond value? And then finally, factors affecting the bond price. And then you have bond price sensitivity. So you have 4 sections that we need to talk about in detail. Let's see whether we could cover it in one class. I hope so. But it's a very elaborate area where you need to take time to understand and grasp as well. Okay. I hope today's lecture was clear for you. So let's meet again next week. Thank you so much for listening. Okay.